Preeti Bodeti and welcome back to the Tech Art Learning Hub. As in our previous demos, we explored how to use LLM APIs and also use Gradio to make our app even more interactive. Now, in this session, we are going to use two new features. One is streaming and the other is integrating Llama model. Now, let's talk about what streaming is. Streaming enables AI to present responses in smaller chunks, displaying them immediately as they are generated. So, instead of waiting for the entire response to generate at once, users see text appearing dynamically, thereby creating a smoother and more natural conversation flow. So, this enhances user interaction by making AI feel more responsive and engaging in real time. See how beneficial it is. Now that we got to know about streaming, now let's move on to what Llama is and how we are going to integrate it. Llama is a free open source AI model developed by Meta that runs locally on your local systems. Unlike OpenAI's GPT and Google's Gemini, which require internet access API keys and they are not free of cost, Llama works locally, which means no cost required or any cloud dependency. So, this works as a great option for those who require more control, privacy, and an AI that does not require any internet connection, which means cost effective. So now let's move on to the hands-on and see how these two new features work in our project. Here I have created a new file streaming AI models in this directory. So in this file I have already added the previous code which we have implemented using Gradio. So I'll just give the brief summary of this code and then we'll move on to adding the streaming and then the Llama model. So here we are, our main motive of this application is to stream the AI models, OpenAI's GPT, Google's Gemini and Llama. So here is the import packages. So OS is to handle the paths and the environment variables, and Gradio is for creating an interactive UI for our app, and then .env is to load the environment variables that are the API keys in .env file. OpenAI and Google Generative AI is to interact with their respective models. Here is loading the environment variables from .env and checking their validation whether they exist or not. And then we move on to the OpenAI initialization and Google's configuration so that we can have connection with their models. And then we have implemented a generate response function where it holds user input and the model choice. So this is given as a function to the Gradio where that interface holds user input and a drop down where we can select two models. One is GPT-4o Mini and Google's Gemini. Depending on the model and the user input, the model generates AI response instantly. So this is the summary of this code till now. Now we are going to work on the streaming part for the GPT and then we will move on to the Google Gemini. So in GPT, here there is a statement response equal to OpenAI chat.completions.create, and we are creating a connection with the model mentioned as GPT-4o Mini and the messages which include system prompt and the user prompt defined in the code. And then we have mentioned an optional parameter temperature which defines the accurate results which we want from the AI response. So here as we are talking about streaming, we are going to add a new feature which is stream equals true. So we are enabling the streaming and I'll just discard the statement. So what this entire line represents is the API is generating the response in the form of chunks but not as an entire full text. So I hope you all got it. So now we will just add a variable result so that we will keep hold of the entire chunks in it. We'll append them. So here I'm just iterating over the streaming response. So for chunk in response, I'm going to give as delta equals chunk dot choices of 0 dot delta. Then if has attribute of delta and then content, and delta dot content, if there is a content under the delta, then result plus equals delta dot content. Okay, then we are going to yield the result. So this is what we have done. So what this means is for chunk in responses, we are iterating over the streaming response generated from the GPT. And then why we are using delta is in OpenAI we use delta because the newly generated text is incrementally generated under delta. So the new text that was generated is incrementally generated under this delta, and the chunk dot choices of 0 dot delta retrieves the newly generated chunk of the generated text. So the new generated chunk it holds, and that is in the delta. So we are here if has attribute of the delta and content, which means whether the chunk holds the content or not, whether it has the actual text generated in that chunk or not. We are just checking it, and if it holds the content, then we are appending that newly generated chunk to the result, so that we will get some result is there, then the newly generated chunk, the result plus the chunk, and again this entire result with the newly generated chunk. So we are getting a chunk, we are checking its content existing or not, and then we are appending it with the result, so that the chunks get generated dynamically, but we'll get the entire response covered in the AI response. I hope you all got it. So here why we are not returning, why we are using yield is like after we just get the result, it immediately sends back to the caller, and then there the output will be generated. So it will not wait for the entire response covered and then it returns to the caller function and generate the result. Whenever the result has come, it immediately goes to the caller function and generates the result. So that is why we use the yield. And this is the part for the streaming. So we will check whether the streaming is working properly or not. So here I will just go and clear this, and let me say as Python streaming AI. Okay, AI models. Is it AI models dot py? So let's see if we could, yeah. So here I will just say as book recommendations for toddlers. I would say, oops, sorry. So here I have selected the GPT and let's submit it. So we'll see how the response is. See, y'all can see the difference, like how it is just going chunk by chunk, and then it's just streaming. There is no need for us to wait until it selects for the entire response and then it generates it completely. It has just given it as in a streaming format. I hope you all found the difference. If not so, just check the previous and then again come to this video, so you will get to know how the responses differed. Now let's move on to the Gemini. So here in Gemini 1.5 Flash, we have Gemini equals google.genai.generative model. So we are having a connection with the model Gemini 1.5 Flash, and then we are generating the content based on the user input, and then the response is given in here. So here what we are going to add for the streaming is same like the GPT. We are going to add an attribute stream equals true, thereby enabling the streaming for Gemini. We will discard this again. So here what we are going to do is get the chunks of the response. So already the response here is holding the chunks of data with the Gemini generated. So here what we are going to do is create the result of Gemini, so that we have all the chunks stored in this variable. And then for chunk in response that was generated by Gemini, here we will check if the generated chunk, that is the newly generated chunk, holds the actual content or not. So if has attribute of chunk comma, if whether the text exists or not. Oops, sorry, I should add it as a string. So whether the chunk holds the text or not, and if it holds the text, so what we are going to do is this newly generated chunk has to be appended to the result of the Gemini variable. So result Gemini appended with whatever the chunk has been generated. So the chunk's text chunk. So we have appended the text of that newly generated chunk to the result. This is the code, but we have to yield the result. So immediately generate it. So yield result underscore Gemini. So this is the part. See how simple. It doesn't require much of the code thanks to Python. So this is what the streaming is all about for the Gemini model. So we will just test it and see how the streaming is done. So I would say Python streaming. Okay, streaming. So yeah, here we need to select Gemini model because we are testing the streaming for the Gemini, and we will do the same user prompt, book recommendations for toddlers. So I have submitted it and see how the streaming is done for the Gemini. See, it is streaming like the way the GPT has done. So this is the streaming of Gemini. I hope you all understood this part. Now we will move on to adding the Llama model to the application and also streaming the Llama as well. So in the Llama, before we start integrating it in our project, firstly we need to download the Llama from their website, and then we need to start hosting it locally. So first I'll tell you all where we need to download. So here is the Llama website, and here we have the download button. So click on it, and depending upon the OS, we can opt for which path we need to go for the download. So if Mac OS, go for it, Linux, go for it, or Windows, go for it. And after the download, I will tell you all how we need to host it locally, and then we will move on to the integrating part. So now the download has been done. So what we need to do now is we need to run the Llama locally. So to do that, in your terminal, you just need to say as Llama serve. So if you do that, so if you can see here, the Llama host is on the port 11434. So it means that on this URL, it has been hosted locally, like in your local system. So now as it is running, we will go to another terminal, and we can check the list of LLMs it supports. So if I say Llama list, it is going to generate quite a few of models. Code Llama, which was developed by Meta AI, of course, like Llama. And Llama 3.2 is also the same. Quen is by Alibaba Cloud, and Phi is from Microsoft. So we can run them so that we can interact with one of these models. So for example, as we are working on Llama, so let's interact with Llama 3.2 in the terminal. So yeah, it has given a prompt, send a message. So we'll say hello. So let's see what response it's gonna give. So how can I assist you today? Can you tell me some books for personal growth? Here are some highly recommended books on personal growth. So it has started giving the list of books. So see, as you can see the response, it is like in a streaming format. The same way we'll work on Llama in our project. So yeah, the Llama 3.2 is giving a quite good response. So now we will just move on to our code, and then we will start adding the Llama model on the response generate response function, and we will integrate that in the Gradio interface. So now we will start with Llama integration. So what we are going to do is, as we have mentioned here, the API keys for the GPT and for the Google's Gemini. In the same way, we are going to interact with Llama via the local URL, like where it is hosted on. So here what we are going to do is, we are going to establish this Llama via OpenAI. So here what I am going to do is, if I say, I'll just keep in keys. So Llama via OpenAI. So we are going to use the OpenAI client. So OpenAI off. Here we are going to give two keys. One is the base URL and the other is API key. As for the Llama, since it can run locally on our machine, we do not require any API key, but we are accessing the Llama model via OpenAI. So OpenAI has a structure of accepting the access key. So for that, we just give it in general. So if I say the base URL equals in double quotes the http:// localhost colon 11434. So this is the URL for the Llama that it was hosted locally on. And then moving on, if we give the API key, it's going to be as let's say Llama. Okay, now I'll also mention the model as Llama 3.2, where we interacted before in our terminal. So this is the model we are mentioning. So yeah, we have given the URL so that we can connect with the Llama 3.2. So now let's add the model in our generate response function. So here, if the model choice is this, and I will give else if. So here also we will give as elif model choice equals Llama 3.2. If the choice is Llama, then this structure is also similar to the OpenAI. So I'll give response equals Llama via OpenAI dot chat dot completions dot create of model equals Llama 3.2, and then messages equals it's going to be okay, let me, I think prompts, because in the function we have is given as prompts. Next we'll give the temperature 0.7. I think let's just get rid of this, and we'll give stream because we are working on streaming as well. So we'll give stream equals true. So this is what the response is. So the llama has given the response in the form of chunks. So we will give the result of llama and empty, so that we'll have all the new chunks generated. They'll be appended on the result llama. So we'll iterate chunk over the streaming response. So for chunk in response, so if I do that, next we are going to give delta equals chunk dot choices of 0 dot delta. Okay, now if has attribute of the delta contains the content. So if the newly generated chunk has actual content, so we are going to check that validation, and then we are going to append that newly generated content to the result. So if it's true, then we are going to append this newly generated chunk to the result. So result llama equals to delta dot content. So yeah, now what we are going to do is we are going to yield this result generated. So result llama. That's all. This is the llama connection and the streaming in llama. So everything is done. So let's see how it works. So I will just execute python streaming AI models.py. So now we have the Gradio interface. Now, I'm sorry, I have done another mistake, because we have updated the function but we did not implement this in our Gradio interface. So we'll just move on to our code, and then we will see the Gradio implementation. Here if you see, we have given the inputs as the input text and the drop down with two choices, that is GPT-4o mini and Gemini 1.5 Flash. We should also mention the llama 3.2. So here I'll say llama 3.2. So we have mentioned the model. The output will all, of course, be the response of the model which we have selected. So I think that's all the implementation is. Now again we will try to run the file. So if we say, let's see how. Yeah, so now if we check the drop down, see as we have updated the Gradio interface, so now we have an additional option llama 3.2. It's so cool seeing this. So let's select llama 3.2, and again we will give the same prompt, book recommendations for toddlers. So if I just submit, let's see how the response will be from llama. That wraps up our today's video. We have successfully implemented streaming in our AI application, making conversations more dynamic. And we also added the Llama model, which we can run locally for free. Whether you prefer OpenAI's GPT or Google's Gemini or a self-hosted solution, you now have the flexibility to choose one. If you found this video more helpful, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to stay updated for more technical content from TechArt Learning Hub. And also, please don't forget to check out the techartdeals.com for a variety of creative products. Thank you for watching, and see you all in the next one.